So welcome everybody. You'll notice that there's somebody on the screen with me. I'll get to that in just a second. But about a month ago, I posted something on LinkedIn regarding a Wall Street Journal article that came out from Joanna Stern and Nicole Wynn. It was on basically how criminals are using your iPhone in all kinds of terrible ways inside of bars and stealing your data. And so I posted about this, and then my friend, I guess we're using the word friend, Eileen here, she had a comment on there and she said, Jeff, great tips. Why don't you talk about a YubiKey? And I said, I've heard of YubiKeys, but I don't really understand them. Why don't you do a post about YubiKeys, Eileen? And she said, well, I'd love to, but why don't we do it together? So first, everybody, this is my friend Eileen. So Eileen, maybe just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your company, and then we'll kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today.
Hi, so my name is Eileen Kara-Hudspeth. I am with Braxton Grant Technologies. We're out of Hanover, Maryland. And I am the technical director. I've been with the company now for almost 11 years. And we do a lot of government, but we do commercial work. We do small, medium-sized businesses. We're focusing on a lot of NIST CMMC certifications for our DIB customers, but we do support other customers outside, so I like the opportunity to talk to a new group of folks. So thank you for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, awesome. So, you know, I've heard about YubiKeys, so this is kind of an example of what we're talking about, YubiKeys, yes. And I've heard security professionals for years say this is kind of like the premier way to protect yourself. And what was interesting is the author of the original article, Nicole Wynn, literally like a couple days ago came out with another Wall Street Journal article, and she said, this thing is the best way to protect your account. So for people that have never heard of this, like what is a YubiKey exactly?
So think of YubiKey as the what you could say, commercial version of what was initially used for protecting user assets. So if you think a lot of whether you're a government entity or maybe you're just an entity who needs to be very privatized about who gets access to what. So think of a physical as if like your ID is an ID of who you are. It has who you are, but your ID doesn't necessarily prove, because I could take my picture and put somebody else's on it and I could pretend to be them. So it's another way of additional meaning. It's not just having an ID or having some form of who you are, but it's also, that's what you have, but it's what you know. So this is also what you have would be a YubiKey, but it's what you know. Have you put a password or a PIN on this? So a lot of what we do when we log into online accounts is we might put a password in, and that's what we know, but it's nothing we have. So how can I actually prove it's me logging in versus someone else logging in as me? Neither of us have to go through any other forms of proving who we are. So this is like a tangible you must have with you, whether that's an NFC, which is the one that you are holding. I'm using the USB-C and the Lightning, so that's a different version of the same one you have, just meant for different inputs. And that really gives you it's two different types. It's stronger because you physically have to have something with you, and it's not just what you know or what you happen to write down as a password, and that really is what strengthens it. That physical, you must have this with you or you will not be able to get in.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I've talked a little bit in the past too. I think a lot of people today, we think, well, if I have my password and I'm using some form of multi-factor, that I'm largely protected. But I've talked about a couple scenarios where even when somebody's using multi-factor, we've seen their account gets compromised and they accidentally push the button. You know, it was, you know, or they call it MFA fatigue, right? Like it's coming on their account and just some other, just kind of like maybe weird configurations with MFA. So the YubiKey helps solve that, right? Because I actually have to physically have it with me. I can't accidentally push the button per se when I'm using a YubiKey.
So it also means that there are certain circumstances where having a YubiKey would be key, where there are circumstances where a YubiKey may not be the best fit because whatever the product is or vendor product you're using, they may not support that type of who are you? Do you physically have this plugged in? Mm-hmm. Not only do you have to plug it in, but there's actually a button, or on yours there's a push button on the top. You actually have to press this after you've inserted it, or with the NFC one, you wave the NFC, or you plug it in if it's USB-A and you push the button. So it still requires you to physically be connecting. So there are some circumstances where YubiKey will not allow you to have that extra level of security, but it's also understanding what vendor products, whether it's software or a phone, what it does and what it supports, because there are use cases for both. So like, for instance, a phone, you know, the fact that I have Face ID would open this. That's not really, that is something I have or something I am. That's a physical biometric. But I think to the point you're talking about where people's phones were getting stolen, watching someone put their PIN in or waiting for somebody's face to unlock it, a lot of the face IDs or even the biometrics do have some backups where you have a PIN backup. So if you watch somebody put their PIN in, you now have what they know. So think of that as the password. That's what they know is the PIN. Now you can get in and you can unlock some of that stuff just based on the PIN.
So let's talk about that example, because I think we want to talk about that today as a way to protect it. So I've got my phone, right? That's something I have. And now somebody saw me put in my PIN, or maybe they have my face because they gave me something, they slipped something in my drink or something. And so now our phone's exposed. How does a YubiKey help protect some of my data on the phone?
So there are some options with certain phone vendors where you can actually use a YubiKey to prevent access to log into the phone. In that circumstance, it is the balance between how secure am I trying to be versus how functional do I want to be with my phone. I don't want to have to keep constantly pulling this out and using it to get into my phone. This will obviously work with an Android or an Apple because it's got both of the Lightning and the USB-C on it. But that kind of limits my functionality. So I need to kind of determine security over functionality, and that's a hard balance for each person. You balance what that is. So what does that mean? If you're going to have any type of biometrics, you need to back it up with a password, preferably not something that's super simple, that's not based on your address, your phone number, your birth date, your anniversary, your children's, nothing that somebody can figure that out. And it needs to be something that you can remember, that you haven't written down somewhere, but also that you're going to be able to use. And if you're going to use biometrics, realize that password at some point may be something that someone's going to try and unlock. So it should be fairly complicated. Mine is 7 for my PIN, and I probably should actually up that just for putting pins in my phone. If it's that fast, then I'm going to use biometrics or I'm going to use face if face is used on that phone. So first, determine what your security level is and how much you want to protect it. Apple will support these. There is some side effects on what you can and can't do, so I will make sure that there's a link that you can put to your users on understanding the challenges of putting a YubiKey on an actual Apple phone.
Okay.
What really comes down to, I use a privacy screen. My privacy screen is fairly where somebody can't look at it sideways until it gets to a certain angle. You can't actually see what's on the screen, which also protects if you're doing any type of diagonals with you're dragging for a pattern, or if you're putting your numbers in as well. So I really like my privacy screen for that. Privacy screens also help protect it, so if you're trying to prevent it from cracking, that's also helpful. Other things to think about, if you have apps on your phone that you've logged into, had them automatically log in, somebody gets access to your phone and you don't have any of that second, whether it's YubiKey or extra passwords to get into apps, and you're already allowing yourself to sign in, that's an area of risk, because the moment somebody has access to your phone, if that application does not need a password, now they get in without needing you at all.
Yeah, so maybe talk a little bit more specific about that, because we, in my circle of financial services, there's definitely a difference between getting access to my phone and then getting access to maybe my banking application or something like that. What are some things people can do? Maybe they just want to use the passcode to unlock their phone, but is some extra protection or different ways they can use a YubiKey, maybe in connection with a password manager or something like that, to better protect maybe financial apps?
Well, there's been a lot of news about password managers, and there's quite a debate out there about what the best password managers are and what you should go with. If you're an individual, obviously look at what's important to you, especially if supporting a YubiKey is necessary. You will find that most of those password managers out there will require you to buy a paid service to be able to support YubiKey. So obviously realize if you're making an investment in YubiKey, you're likely also going to have to make the investment in a paid service. So make sure that you evaluate, use a trial to test it out, to make sure you're getting that support with the YubiKey. That way, even if somebody has access to your phone, they don't have access to your passwords. But I want to talk about where you store passwords. Password managers, there's quite a few of them. Browsers, not considered a password manager. It may save your passwords for you, but it will easily cough them up. Malware is one way. There's also applications that can pull them. I'll give you an example. So for instance, I just showed an Apple phone a second ago. If I use Apple Key Store, there's actually ways to pull out my key phrases from that. So I have a face on that for unlocking. However, if I bomb my face out long enough to get into my actual pass keys for Apple, I can actually get back to the PIN screen. So that gives me a PIN screen I can try to attempt. If I don't have the face that unlocks it, I can continue to try and hammer at that PIN.
So I want to reiterate what you just said, because I don't think a lot of people realize that. You're basically saying, as a security expert, you're saying use a separate password manager. Do not rely on the one built in to your browser, essentially.
Correct. not in the browser.
Yeah.
And then think carefully if you actually want to use so I think you can save some passwords in, if you're an Android user, you can save some passwords in Google and maybe in your Mail account or your Google account. Same thing with Apple. I always like to segment your risk, meaning separate it from the whole eggs in one basket statement comes to mind, but try to segment where you put all your stuff so that one person can't get to the keys of the kingdom and the gold right away. They have to work at it. You make it harder for them to get to it, it's going to make it better to protect yourself as well, because it's not as easy to get access to your information.
Cool. I know we're trying to limit our time somewhat, and I feel like we could go for like days, and we'll probably have to do a second session, the two of us together. But I think the last question people have on their mind is they say, what happens if I lose it or it gets broken?
So like most things, you normally don't have one key to your house or one key to your car. So yes, the recommendation would be is you either get two of the same type. So I have I think this is technically like the 5i, 5C. It's the mobile one, and the one you have. So maybe I have two of these. Because these are the types of devices that need this input that I connect to the most. USB-C, which is going to be used for a lot more of your computer devices, and maybe
so you can mix and match.
So this is a dual, and then and this doesn't have any NFC. So let's say I have NFC devices, but I have USB-A. Yours would be a good option because your NFC is NFC, so you just wave it over the back of the phone, and that would unlock it, or you can actually plug it into computer. So mine, good for mobile or computer. Yours is also good for mobile computer. So have two. And what you do is everywhere you register this, you register your backup as well. So if you lose one, you use your backup, and then you go ahead and you buy a new one, and you go ahead and register that. So yeah, store it in somewhere you're not going to use it, not going to lose it. Be careful carrying them around. I've got one of the Night Eyes locks on mine so that I can lock it closed so it doesn't come off, because I certainly don't want to lose this, considering how important it is.
Yeah, great. Eileen, any final thoughts today before we sign off?
No, I think the biggest thing is, definitely have more complex passwords. Think about where you are when you're using your phone. It's very easy for us to get inundated with walking down the street, checking an email, following up with something, not paying attention to our surroundings. So a lot of that peripheral vision and being situationally aware of our environment is definitely the first step to making sure that we're protecting ourselves and our assets.
Cool. Awesome. All right, Eileen, thank you so much. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you.